that is the thing. What if is the interpretation that some have had online is that the editor of Science is saying, no, the public shouldn't critique science. I'm trying to be charitable with it, but so unless you were not paying, well, you may not have been paying attention because this is far more in the scientific space than it is in just general public domain. But you would have been listening about the trial, defamation trial, Michael Mann versus Mark Steyn, along with another blogger, if you will, or another opinion commentator, as you may want to put it, just on this particular case of defamation. And I'm not actually going to talk too much about the specific case, with the exception of a few things that I'm going to talk about first at the jump. But actually, there was another piece that Science wrote, an editorial piece that Science wrote, that I think is worth a discussion, and a much longer commentary on the interface between public opinion and scientific process, and the very now different landscape with information and communication compared to 12 years ago, which is when this case, this defamation lawsuit by Michael Mann, was filed. So let us a quick read on the backstory of the case, but then I want to switch over to a Science article, which is a much more interesting, and frankly, I think Science is trying to have it, Science the magazine and the author of that opinion piece are trying to have it both ways. And we'll see here in a second. Jury rules for climate science Michael Mann in long-running defamation case. A jury found today, and this is as of February 8th, by the way. A jury found today that Michael Mann, a prominent climate scientist, was defamed by writers of two blog posts 12 years ago that compared his work on global warming to child molestation. Now, in the case of this, I don't necessarily think it's entirely correct to call it two blog posts, because the original post in question that got specifically Mark Steyn in trouble was on the opinion pages of the National Review, which is technically a news outlet. So that just being put out there. In ruling for Mann, the 6-person jury in Superior Court at the District of Columbia awarded Mann just $2 in actual damages due to defamation, but then levied a $1 million fine against one of the defendants, Mark Steyn, conservative author and broadcaster, for punitive damages. That I don't think is quite right. But Rand Simberg, the other defendant, faces $1,000 in punitive damages. I thought this was compensatory damages, but I could be wrong. Just making a point there. The ruling is a victory for climate researchers who have been frequently attacked online over their work, and especially for Mann, who has faced the brunt of it, says Lauren Krantz, executive director of the Climate Science Legal Defense Fund. The actual facts in this case are so dramatic. In a statement, Mann said, "I hope this verdict sends a message that falsely attacking climate scientists is not protected speech." There's going to be some arguments over that, for sure, I don't doubt. Fact of the matter, I would love to see FIRE weigh in on that, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. At the same time, the ruling could end up having a chilling effect on necessary public criticism of science, says Jean Polisinski. I don't think I pronounced that right, but I apologize if I didn't. A senior fellow at the Freedom Forum, a nonpartisan foundation focused on First Amendment protections. People will need to be, quote, more judicious in commentary. There might be more vague or circumspect. And that could be to the detriment of the public, he says. It's important in today's world for people to be aware of research that's going on and having people both praise and criticize it openly. Mann is one of the world's best-known climate scientists, a longtime paleoclimatologist at Penn State University until his move in 2022 to the University of Pennsylvania. He is a frequent source in news stories and a combative personality on social media. I would agree with that. There's a reason I don't follow him all that much on social media, where he regularly butts heads with those he believes are misrepresenting climate science or seeking to delay action on human-driven climate change. At the heart of Mann's lawsuit are two 25-year-old scientific papers that he led. The studies combined historical records with tree rings and other temperature proxies going back 1,000 years to show that temperatures stayed largely flat until the past century when they rose sharply. A key chart from the papers, dubbed the hockey stick because of its shape, was used in the 2001 UN climate report. It has remained an icon of climate science, underscoring the outsized impact of human activity on temperature. Quote, "The hockey stick is a critical context for climate change that is occurring now," said Jessica Tierney, a paleoclimatologist at the University of Arizona. For as long as it has existed, however, Mann and his hockey stick have been besieged by criticism, scientific and otherwise. Follow-up work, some by climate contrarians, found statistical flaws in his methods. Critics also cast doubt on the whole record by noting that tree rings in the far north tracked global temperatures less faithfully after 1960. But the underlying insight held up. A consortium of scientists using nearly 700 proxy records found in 2017 that recent warming is unmatched in the past 2,000 years. All the reconstructions, Tierney says, show the exact same thing. The temperatures we are experiencing today are really unprecedented. Indeed, present temperatures may now be the warmest in the past 100,000 years. The barrage of attacks against Mann reached a peak after ClimateGate, which is the email thing, in 2009. But now let's fast forward to the relevant actual thing here. One of those attacks was written in 2012 by Simberg, then a blogger at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, following the arrest of Penn State's Jerry Sandusky, a child molester who coached football at the school. Simberg likened the case to the university's investigation of Mann, saying Mann, quote, "molested and tortured data" to reach his conclusions on the hockey stick. Steyn then quoted Simberg's post in a blog hosted by the National Review, calling Mann's work fraudulent. Now, this is important context to have. For those of you who may not remember here, in 2012, Penn State did have the whole Jerry Sandusky scandal blow up in his face, and it was a horrific situation because the man should never have been around kids. In the slightest. The man should never, ever, ever have been around kids. And so with Michael Mann being at Penn State at the time when this was said in print, I'm sure it did cause a lot of headaches and kerfuffles with all that. But there is a lot more to discuss with that. And normally with the case, I mean, not with the article itself, I agree that what Steyn and Simberg said was absolutely abhorrent in that front. I actually don't very much disagree with that, at least from what I can remember of the exact piece at the time. And the reason I say that, and the reason I don't have the National Review piece to actually show you, is that it doesn't exist on the National Review's website anymore. I actually went to go looking for it and I can't find it. So if any of you can find it, an old copy of it, I would love to read it just to refresh my memory. And I think it's important to, have the record of what was said. It may be listed in the actual legal briefs and all that stuff. I just haven't dived into that far enough to find it. But anywhoozle, I think it's important to maintain the context of what was said and what wasn't said. Mann fought back before and after the email leaks, often with harsh language. Correspondence revealed in the trial showed that he called one of his critics human filth and suggested that a retired atmospheric scientist with contrarian views advanced her early career by dating someone on the faculty. In 2011, he sued Timothy Ball, a prominent Canadian climate change doubter, for defamation after Ball accused him of scientific fraud, a case that was ultimately dismissed in 2019 by a Canadian judge because of its extensive delays. In 2012, he sued Simberg and Steyn. Mann testified that he is not paying for his legal fees for this lawsuit, but he has not stated who is. So, here's the thing with this. One of the things that happened in Discovery is, of course, you get to see everybody's cards on the table with it, and open up investigations all over again and what have you. And yeah, I'm gonna say from what I read in the commentary, and I'll show this to you right now because it's actually here and available online as it's been put out by others. I will not go into it in depth. You can read it yourselves here with this. In that there was a lot of very nasty, abhorrent things that were said. Okay? But where I want to get to is actually this particular article. This is an editorial that was published by Science last week after after the verdict, of course. And it makes an interesting, but I think incorrect point with this. A very incorrect point with all of it. Passion is not misconduct. Now, I will say straight from the jump. Indeed, passion itself is not misconduct. All of us are very passionate about things that we do. However, passion misplaced can lead to misconduct. And that is a very important distinction that we should have in this. Passion can lead to misconduct. Passion itself is not. And I do think, when you're passionate to the point that you are smearing somebody, then yeah, it can rise to the level of misconduct. Regardless of the reason why I'm not necessarily commenting on that particular case, but anyway, because more so of this topic. But let us begin. This is written by Holden Thorpe, who I believe is the editor-in-chief of Science magazine currently. University of Pennsylvania climate scientist Michael Mann was awarded more than $1 million in a lawsuit against bloggers who accused him of scientific misconduct in inflammatory terms, likening his treatment of data to what a child molester did to children. The verdict suggested that there are limits to which scientists working on politically sensitive topics can be falsely attacked. But the case also says something profound about the difference between matters of opinion and scientific interpretations that can be worked out through normal academic processes. Although Mann has expressed strong and even intemperate emotions and words in political discourse, the finding of the District of Columbia Superior Court boiled down to the fact that it is not an opinion that determines when scientific misconduct occurs, but rather misconduct that can be established using known processes. Hold on a second. The second paragraph is actually more so about what the jury concluded, and that's fine. Mann told me that he's aware that he is passionately outspoken, but said the hockey stick paper evoked relentless berating and condemnation, which is wrong. I will admit to that. I will agree with that statement. That's the correct word to phrase it there. It is wrong to engage in that, regardless of who publishes the paper. So no, you shouldn't be doing that. It's perfectly human to react when attacked. Let's see. Mann lamented, "I would hate to think that young scientists would have to make a choice to withstand attack if they want to study politically contentious topics. He also sees assaults on science as advancing the conservative agenda. They want to make doing science in these areas so toxic that young people won't want to go into it." For that, I would actually point a little bit to Fareed Zakaria's commentary a couple months back after the congressional testimony, because he points out that universities in general are losing public trust, and a lot of folks don't want to go into university, and by extension, because we train the next generation of scientists at our universities, well, maybe not there either, and that tends to be because of the politicization. There is what he suggests. This is Dr. Mann's opinion. I don't necessarily agree with him, in that there's also polling data that shows that public trust in scientists has fallen across the political spectrum. It's still a majority of folks. Yes, it's still a majority of folks who technically have some confidence in scientists, but it has gone down. And so I would disagree with some of the commentary there that is made. But that is neither here nor there. And it's not the important part of this particular article. I just wanted to mention it while it's there. The hockey stick graph stands as published because the data were peer-reviewed and addressed questions from experts. Accusations of misconduct were addressed by running established processes outlined by federal agencies, journals, and universities. The paper has not been retracted, and calling it fraud thus met the standards for defamation. A lesson of the verdict is that despite its flaws, the process for vetting, publishing, and curating scientific findings in the literature is still the best game in town. That may be so, but I want to point this out because this comes from that article of Corey Clark and others that was published recently, the scientific censorship article. The thing about it is peer review is great, but if there is epistemic consequences potentially to scientific censorship that also needs to be considered, in that you may be ending up really, and you wouldn't know it necessarily, with this particular situation where, yeah, peer-reviewed published literature says this, but there might actually be more evidence that doesn't agree with all of this in here to say the opposite of what you think, or something actually completely different if we're trying to not put this into a binary. And so peer review is most definitely not perfect. And that is why a lot of criticisms and critiques, even of peer-reviewed literature, should be allowed, not thrown aside. And even, sterling critiques from the public. And if we go back in scientific history, and even in the history of climate science, this is the case, you did have a lot of changes and breakthroughs and things like that from folks who were not part of that established community of climatologists in the history of climate science. So, I question the wisdom of, maybe question the wisdom is not the right way to phrase it, but peer review is great. It's probably one of the best things we have. But we should be careful that it doesn't turn into this particular situation. Let's put it that way, is the way I want to put it. With that, and again, this comes from this article here: pro-social motives underlie scientific censorship by scientists, a perspective and research agenda. So I very much suggest reading it. It's a great article. We've done it for a Rogue Journal Club if you want to go look at that on the channel. In here. So this is where it gets weirdly interesting to me. Although some free speech advocates warn that the verdict will have a chilling effect on criticism of scientific findings, perhaps the verdict can be viewed more optimistically as appropriately directing matters of opinion to blogs and opinion columns, while matters of scientific disagreement are handled in the literature of scientific record. Okay. Is this... I have seen it talked about. I have seen it talked about online, and I ask the same questions that others do in this case. Is this the editor of Science, the editor-in-chief of Science, saying that the public cannot have scientific disagreements or cannot disagree with scientific findings? Because the truth is, if you're talking about matters of opinion, you may have an opinion that you think a scientist's work is really great. You may have an opinion that a scientist's work is really bad. That's still their opinion. You may disagree to the nth degree with their particular work. Now, the difference is disagreement versus attacks. I already said it. The berating, the condemnation, the attacks on them should not have happened. That does not preclude someone expressing their opinion to say, look, I think this is pretty terrible, and here's why. Or I think this study is really great, and here's why. Any number of different things. But that can come from the public, and more will so come from the public for a particular reason, in that most journals are moving towards open access. Most journals are moving toward being able to have people freely access their articles online out of the principle of communality, and that scientific knowledge and research belongs to everyone. But by the extension of scientific research and knowledge belonging to everyone, then that does mean that, well, almost everyone or anyone could probably end up critiquing something, unless I'm totally mistaken, on something else going on here. So that is the thing. What if it's the interpretation that some have had online is that the editor of Science is saying, no, the public shouldn't critique science. I'm trying to be charitable with it, but I can see the concerns of free speech advocates in that, are you basically saying that the public doesn't have the right to criticize scientific findings? And that your opinion should be relegated to opinion blogs, which, it's going to be out there and it's going to be read, and it's probably going to be, frankly, read more frequently than those journal articles would be. Because let's face it and be honest here, most of the public doesn't read journal articles, which is where most of that scientific disagreement is hammered out. Most of that scientific disagreement between the professionals is hammered out in paper published, comment, rebuttal paper, all those kinds of things, hashing it back and forth until you come to some kind of conclusion about it. And maybe you never do. Maybe it's decades later when you finally do. But I question the wisdom of just saying matters of opinion should be in blogs and opinion columns only. And, well, what is a matter of opinion? Because the prior part of the sentence does suggest, you're talking about criticism of scientific findings. Well, what if my opinion involves criticizing scientific findings and there's a person in the general public? This is where it gets extremely strange, and it does seem very much like the comment here is, well, general public shouldn't weigh in on scientific disagreements. No, they should, and more often they will. Now, like, because of open access, because of being able to share things immediately on Twitter, whether or not it's a good thing, we're going to find out, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever it happens to be, over the next decades, I'm sure. And I'm sure there's social scientists who are probably going to be digging into some of those commentary, but yeah. I'm preferential to saying the public should weigh in if they disagree with the findings and find something interesting elsewhere themselves. They should be able to express an opinion that I disagree with that, and here's why. Of course, it should never translate into berating a text. Never, ever, ever should. Unfortunately, the way the world works, it probably will at times. But I don't have a problem with general public criticizing scientists. I don't have a problem with criticism of scientific findings. I don't have a problem with any of it. And indeed, talking about healthy things here with society, I think that's probably a good thing for society in general, to be able to criticize its knowledge makers. Because one of the things universities are, of course, centers of knowledge, pursuit of the truth, right? Well, you should be able to criticize them then if you're placing such heavy burden on them to be those engines of knowledge that we rely on them to be, engines of knowledge in pursuit of the truth, then yeah, they should be open to criticism and critiques, and so should science, which is also its pursuit of the truth, also centered around the pursuit of the truth. So I tend to disagree with what's going on here, but it's also not phrased the best way to make it clear to me what Holden Thorpe was actually saying. I don't necessarily agree with the commentary online that's like, oh, he's just saying that it seems that way, just saying that the public shouldn't comment on scientific disagreements. I'm not 100% sure that's actually what's being said by the authorship. But the next part of this is actually also interesting. Another lesson is that some may prefer scientists to be more restrained and circumspect than Mann. Expressing passionate views does not, although some scientists may prefer to be more restrained, some may prefer scientists to be more restrained and circumspect than Mann. Expressing passionate views does not justify false accusations from critics. Being passionate in your views, no, it doesn't justify those accusations, but being passionate about something, if it's not tempered carefully, can lead to misconduct. And I will leave it up to other minds. Specifically with Mann's case and the discovery of the documents there. But if you are going into the point where you yourself are so passionately in defense of yourself that you are making inflammatory accusations, then yeah, that does come into areas of misconduct on both parties. I do agree with the commentary that Steyn and Simberg's commentary on Michael Mann was horrifically bad. Don't get me wrong. I agree with that. It was horrifically bad. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea to go back in the other direction either when somebody makes that kind of accusation. So it's a question of whether or not, you take it too far. Passion itself is indeed not misconduct. It's the actions you take based upon your passions, if you will, that may cross the line into misconduct. Whether or not Mann did that, I leave that for others to find themselves. I'm not going to go into that myself, but that is a point to say in that No, it's about your actions you take in your passions, not passion itself, or having passionate views about something. Opinions are protected speech, and both scientists and their critics should be welcome to express them. There's a debate in the scientific community about whether scientists undermine their credibility by being outspoken. Suppressing one's humanity harms one's credibility even more. What's more is that scientists are dispassionate in their research publications, not on social media or in opinion pages. There's a couple of thoughts there, in that I don't know that the general public necessarily separates the two. I certainly can, because I do it myself. Can be passionate in speaking about something, yes, and be dispassionate in your research and be after the truth. That may be the case that you can separate them both. Absolutely, I'm not saying that. I just don't know whether that's truly held by the general public necessarily. That would be a good question in the social science community, how much the public sees that in the perceptions of scientists. Opinions are protected speech. And scientists and their critics should be welcome to express them. You are indeed correct on that. They should be welcome to express them. But this is where it gets weird, because should matters of opinions be in opinion blogs, but opinions are protected speech, so there's seemingly a contradiction there that's very strange. But suppressing one's humanity harms one's credibility even more. Here's the thing about that. I go back to the Pew Research polling of late 2023, where they're actually looking at trust and confidence in science and scientists in the United States, and how that has actually fallen off across the board. I think there's a role for that kind of polling in here, and it is potentially the case, where your public speech, particularly if you are a well-known scientific figure, may actually have detrimental impacts for public trust, or it could actually build public trust. One or the other. It could be, or wreck trust in one place and bring trust up in another. Possible too. And so I think there's something to that that's not being discussed here, in that, what is... Again, this is a social science question more so that I really haven't seen anybody try and answer yet, and I would love to see it. But that is the question that came to me was, what is public reaction to a very public figure, a public scientific figure, which Mann is, Fauci is, a whole bunch of others, when they make a statement that is passionate in their views, but perhaps more expressive of their political leanings. And that's fine, express whatever you want to express, right? But what does that mean when they're attaching it to themselves as a scientist? What does that mean for the broader discipline? I go back to the Nature paper. There's a Nature paper on what happened when Nature endorsed Joe Biden for president, for example. And what happened was there was a fall off in trust in Nature. And, subsequently there was a certain degree of fall off, not the same degree, but same kind of trend, fall off in trust in scientists in general after Nature did that. This falls into the same canon as that. When a very public scientist, a very public outspoken scientist, and go for it, be outspoken, but it is perhaps to be mindful of what those words can mean in terms of public trust at the same time, because, well, there is actually a study to support that weighing in on such issues may actually have an inadvertently bad impact. So that's my thoughts on this. Nobody would disagree with this headline in principle, that the passion is not misconduct, because passion itself is not misconduct, but it can certainly lead to that. And frankly, I would rather have and allow folks to be very critical of scientific findings from the public as much as they please. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.